Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. Brazil has reported record 3,780 COVID-19 deaths in a day, taking its toll over 317,000. India has reported highest daily deaths from COVID-19 since mid-December, with 354 people dying in the last 24 hours. In Pakistan, over 4,700 people tested positive, while 78 died overnight, pushing the death toll past 14,400. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.8 million lives and infected 128 million people. In Yemen, the army says it has killed a number of Houthi fighters in multiple attacks on rebel positions. The military says it has liberated many areas from Houthi control in the western province of Taiz and oil-rich Marib Governorate. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called on international companies to cut ties to enterprises that support Myanmar's military. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department ordered its non-essential embassy staff to leave the country due to unrest. In Myanmar, the activists are holding more protests today despite military crackdown. More than 520 people have been killed in 2 months of protests against the February 1st coup. In Libya, the rival factions have reached an agreement to unify the country's divided parliament. A lawmaker said the deal was reached in a meeting of the presidency of the Libyan parliament. The current Libyan parliament is divided between two houses of representatives based in Tripoli and Tobruk. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. Brazil has reported the highest single-day deaths since the pandemic began, with more than 3,700 fatalities overnight. India has reported highest daily deaths from COVID-19 since mid-December, with 354 people dying in the last 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected 128 million people. More details in this report.
The socio-economic repercussions of COVID-19 pandemic keep mounting, laying the ground for aftershocks for years to come. A new report by the World Economic Forum says the pandemic has delayed gender parity by a generation. However, in a more promising development, a study shows that T cells, a critical component of the immune system, protect against the three most concerning new variants. As Brazil keeps logging new highs in cases, the president signed an executive order to disperse nearly $1 billion in new loans to fight the pandemic. Meanwhile, in Chile, a sharp rise in infections has put overwhelmed hospitals on high alert.
There has been an increase in demand, so there has been a need for a temporary space. The hospital has set up 2 trailers so as to increase capacity, and we have also approached cemeteries to allow for bodies to be received. This is being done so that what we're going through will not become a problem.
In Europe, Spain has passed a new law making masks mandatory in all public spaces, indoor or outdoor, until the end of the pandemic. Cases in Turkey and Greece have once again hit daily records as the countries push ahead with their inoculation drives. Germany has restricted the AstraZeneca vaccine for people under 60 years.
It is unquestionably a setback for our vaccination campaign that one of the vaccines available to us appears to pose a risk for a certain age group in this pandemic. Up until yesterday, there were 31 reported cases of thrombosis after being vaccinated with the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. Unfortunately, 9 of them are fatal.
Elsewhere, Australia has fallen 3.4 million doses short of its target of 4 million vaccinations by March 31st, prompting criticism of the government.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, COVID-19 has claimed 78 more lives over the past 24 hours. The health ministry says more than 4,700 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry said the death toll has risen to 14,434. The virus has infected nearly 668,000 people so far, of which more than 603,000 people have recovered. The ministry said the number of active cases has jumped to over 50,000, while the country's positivity rate has shot up to 10.8% today. And in Yemen, the army says it has killed a number of Houthi fighters in multiple attacks on rebel positions. The military says it has liberated many areas from Houthi control in the western province of Taiz and oil-rich Marib Governorate. The military also claimed advancing after dealing heavy damage to rebels in the battle for the oil-rich Marib Governorate. Meanwhile, Houthis' attacks against the coalition forces continue as well. Earlier, Yemen's foreign ministry said rebels targeted refugee camps north of Marib with artillery and missile shells. The Marib offensive has escalated recently as the calls from the international community ramped up to end the war in Yemen. In Libya, the rival political factions have reached an agreement to unify the country's divided parliament. Lawmaker Fawzi al-Nuwairi said the presidency of the parliament met in Tripoli. Al-Nuwairi said the stakeholders termed the unification of ministries a gift for the Libyan people. The Libyan parliament is divided between two houses of representatives in Tripoli and Tobruk. Libya's rival groups agreed in UN-mediated talks last month to form an interim unity government to lead the country till elections. Moving on, the U.S. has called on international companies to consider cutting ties to enterprises that support Myanmar's military. At a news conference, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the military's action against its own civilians are reprehensible. The U.S. State Department also ordered its non-essential embassy staff to leave the country due to unrest. In Myanmar, the activists are holding more protests today despite the military crackdown. Meanwhile, fighting has flared between the army and insurgents in frontier regions, with refugees spilling over borders. More than 520 people have been killed in 2 months of protests against the February 1st coup. And envoys from the EU, Denmark, Canada, and China have appreciated Pakistan's peace efforts in the region, especially in Afghanistan. This comes after the four held separate meetings with the Pakistan Army Chief in Rawalpindi. In a statement, the military's media wing said the Army Chief discussed progress on CPEC in his meeting with the Chinese envoy. It said the Army Chief thanked the envoy for China's contribution towards fight against the coronavirus in Pakistan. In his meeting with other three envoys, the Army Chief said Pakistan looks forward to enhance multi-domain relations based on common interest. The Director General of Inter-Services Intelligence, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, also attended the meetings. Egypt says it supports Sudan's calls for an international quartet to mediate the trilateral crisis on the Nile Dam project. The Egyptian Minister of Water Resources stressed the need for sincere efforts for the success of negotiations. He said Ethiopia's unilateral measures regarding the dam's construction will result in repercussions. Earlier, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi also warned that the dam will bring unimaginable instability for the whole region. Ethiopian dam's construction has heightened regional tensions, with downstream Egypt and Sudan pressing for a deal. In Pakistan, the international military exercise ACES Meet 2021 is underway at Musaf Air Base in Punjab province. The air forces of the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are participating in the drills along with Pakistan Air Force. In a tweet, the Saudi Defense Ministry said a number of its Air Force's Tornado combat aircraft are taking part in the exercise. Bahrain, Egypt, and Jordanian Air Forces are attending the drill as observers. The exercise is scheduled to continue till April 10th. It aims to provide an exchange of experiences and expertise in the field of combat and planning. Now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. will speak out about human rights everywhere, including at home. He was presenting the State Department's first human rights report under President Joe Biden. The report criticized Iran, China, Russia, and others for violent crackdowns, especially on opposition and minorities. The State Department said a large number of people continue to suffer under brutal conditions in 2020. It added the coronavirus pandemic also placed obstacles to human rights and fundamental freedoms. Blinken tried to dispel the notion that the report targets any country in particular.
Whether it's China, Russia, or anyone else, we're not standing against any of those countries. We're not trying to, for example, contain China or keep it down. What we are about is standing up for basic principles, basic rights, and a rules-based international order that has served us and countries around the world very, very well.
Meanwhile, in the U.S., witnesses continue to testify on the second day of hearings in the George Floyd murder case that spawned the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. They described how Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis policeman charged with Floyd's murder, was unmoved by their pleas. A Minneapolis firefighter told the courtroom she pleaded the police to allow her to give Floyd medical attention. She said because of her training, she instantly recognized that Floyd had an altered level of consciousness. The firefighter said she identified herself as a medic, but the police prevented her from giving chest compressions to Floyd. Earlier, the jurors also heard the teenager who recorded the video of Chauvin pinning the neck of Floyd. More stories after a short break. Stay with us. We're back. SpaceX has announced the final crew members of what they call the world's first all-civilian mission to space. The mission, dubbed Inspiration 4, will be commanded by 38-year-old billionaire philanthropist Jared Isaacman. Christopher Sembroski and Dr. Cyan Proctor will join previously announced crew member Haley Arsenault. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket will launch the crew aboard a Dragon spacecraft later this year. The crew members will undergo commercial astronaut training by SpaceX. The mission is being targeted for the 15th of September from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It will be monitored by SpaceX Mission Control. And China has launched a new Earth observation satellite from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center. The satellite Gaofen 1202 was launched aboard a Long March 4C carrier rocket. The satellite will be used in land surveys and urban planning. It will determine and register land rights, road network design, crop yield estimates, and disaster prevention and relief. The latest launch was the 364th mission of the Long March rocket series. And in Belgium, a chocolate maker is trying an unusual way to boost his business as the pandemic has kept foreign tourists away from Bruges City. More details in this report.
On a spring day, the picturesque city of Bruges, crisscrossed with canals, is normally humming with foreign tourists. But plummeting visitor number has taken a toll on many of the shops in town. In such times, chocolate maker Dominic Persone has concocted spring specials ahead of Easter. He says the customer wants to go on an adventure when they are eating something. The former chef is particularly proud of his praline.
So we make a juice of grass, Granny Schmidt, and to put an extra acidity on it, we use the Japanese lime. It's yuzu. And the combination of those two, it's amazing. It's of course important to find the right balance between your chocolate, an origin chocolate, and then those flavors.
Persone says he believes chocolate contains a secret ingredient that has the power to counter the lockdown blues. Customers at his shop echo his sentiment.
What it brings, mostly extra fat, but also extra joy. And I think it's good during these times. Like now I'm gonna buy something for me and my girlfriend because with Corona we are we're not seeing much of our friends. It's very hard, and that makes life a little bit better. So I would say chocolate makes life a bit better.
Belgium is trying to stem the third wave of COVID-19 infections, with most non-food shops open only by appointment. More than 22,000 people have died from the virus in the country, among the world's highest per capita fatality rates.
And now on to the latest in business. The International Monetary Fund says it will raise its forecast for global economic growth after last year's 3.5% contraction. However, financial conditions remain highly uncertain, with economic activity still tied closely to the pandemic. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said governments spent nearly $16 trillion in fiscal support. She told the Council on Foreign Relations that the global economy is on strong footing now. She added vaccines are not yet available to everyone, and many people continue to face job losses and rising poverty. Georgieva said the U.S. and China are leading a multi-speed recovery from the crisis, but developing economies will see a 20% drop in per capita income. Most major bourses in the Asia-Pacific have declined as investor sentiment turns cautious amid the third wave of COVID-19. The Nikkei 225 in Japan is leading the losses, descending nearly 1%. Mainland Chinese shares have also dipped over 0.5%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index has also slipped. Seoul's Kospi 2 has shed marginally. However, the ASX 200 in Australia has bucked the trend, gaining close to 1%. And now it's time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.